Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I am excited and honored to be here to share with you at this conference. Before we get into the talk too much, I thought I should first explain my position as it relates to the work we do. I am a Black Christian woman from Philadelphia. I was a first generation college student. And when I first started teaching, my father would tell people she's a school teacher as a point of pride for himself. And every time my 88-year-old grandmother hears somebody refer to me as Dr. Royal, she still smiles in amazement and in disbelief. So me being here is a big deal to them. As a Christian, I approach my work in education from an ethos of love and possibility, from a deep belief that resurrection is possible and no failure is final, not from judgment, not from condemnation, and not from fundamentalism. I identify myself as a Christian not as an effort to sway anyone to believe as I do, but to paraphrase the disciple Peter. I think we each need to sweep around your own front door before you sweep around mine. And as the Apostle Paul wrote, I believe that we must each examine ourselves. As an academic, I'm an education historian who studies the intersection of schools and school systems with educators, not with students. Students are rarely the problem. And if the children are the problem, when you get to the root of the problem, there is usually an adult attached to it. Over the last 14 years, I've learned that students do what adults allow them to do. We set the parameters, which can be both a good thing and a bad thing. When we get better, our students get better. My passion is for us to get better and to do better. I'm also a critical race theorist. So when I say race, I mean it as defined by Henry Giroux, a set of attitudes, values, lived experiences, and affective identifications. Much like Omi and Wanat, I see race as significant in both our American social structure and cultural representations. I see issues of race as endemic, systemic, and fully embedded in every facet of American life, culture, our social structure, and our institutions. In the tradition of Gloria Ladson-Billings, who I had the honor of having on my dissertation committee, I believe our schools are tools of social reproduction that purport false notions of meritocracy. I believe colorblindness is a farce. Color muteness is a lie. I do not believe we are post-racial in this country. Racism still exists. Not necessarily our parents' and grandparents' version of overt racism. Not the racism of separate water fountains and relegation to the backs of buses, but the racism that Lennon Parker referred to as mundane practices and events that are infused with some degree of unconscious racial malintent. Actions that are subtle, automatic, nonverbal exchanges often seen as derogatory slights. We live and work in a time of the subtle racism that confines Asians to the model minority myth and then complains to blacks and Latinos with the sentiments that say, why can't you be more like them? We live and work in a time of the subtle racism of the so-called achievement gap, which subverts the intellectual capacity of black students and reifies notions of their academic inferiority and holds up whiteness as the universal standard of excellence. But still, in spite of all that, I have hope. I believe in us. I still have faith that our collective humanity can triumph and defeat this American cancer, quietly killing us in our schools, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, our government, on Facebook, and on other areas of social media. I believe in the unity of all people and the necessity of our concern for and connection to one another. I do want to warn you that not everything I say this morning will be pleasant. But it's meant from a place of love and a desire to see students succeed and teachers succeed in helping students succeed. Most times when we talk about issues of race, some of us get angry while others of us get quiet. Some of us get angry and quiet. As I get into things that are uncomfortable and unpleasant, I'm asking that you lean into the pain. Let it ride. Let it be. Let the pain speak to you listen to it, see what it says, see what I say and what the pain you may experience as a result of what I say. See what that pain says to you. Lean into the pain. The only way out is in. One of the best decisions I ever made was to become a teacher. It's taken more patience and humility than I could have ever imagined, but I wouldn't take nothing for my journey now. So before I say anything else, I want to thank you for the work you do. I want to thank you for being here early on a Saturday morning. Thank you for showing up every day and every year to be your best and to give your best. But in spite of our best efforts, we know that all is not well on the education front across this nation, across each state in this nation, across the state of Minnesota, and in our local school districts. All isn't well, but it isn't all bad either. I see our current education situation much like Paulo Freire wrote. Education is suffering from a narration sickness. The stories we hear in the media about the state of American education tend to be oversimplified, gross exaggerations, and filled with inaccuracies. This isn't new. This national negative narration has origins that go back at least 30 years to the A Nation at Risk report. Our current national narrative on teachers is not much more pleasant than that was. Whether it was suggested in Wisconsin, insinuated in the public schools of the District of Columbia, or protested in Chicago, unfortunately, our current national narrative suggests that teachers are lazy and uncaring and overpaid. That educators are the sole party responsible for everything wrong with students in schools. In a world where information comes as quickly as you can get to your smartphone, but is limited to the 140 characters Twitter allows, it's easy to reduce our current education situation to villains and heroes. But I don't believe that. That narrative is wrong and mean-spirited. It is short-sighted and quick-tempered. That narrative is disrespectful. It is uninformed, and it is beneath us all. I believe everyone in here either is already a great teacher or is en route to becoming a great teacher. I believe we all operate with talents, skill, love, passion, and a desire to see all of our students succeed. I believe we all want the best for our children. I've been around long enough, I've been a teacher long enough to know that anyone who writes lesson plans, reads essays, grades papers, calls parents, corrects behavior, coaches sports, sponsors activities, does lunch duty, morning duty, hall duty, holds detention, coach class, morning meetings, anyone who does these things day after day, week after week, year after year, we want to do well for our students. We don't wake up early in the morning devising new and more evil ways to thwart the learning of children. No educator sits at home or in Starbucks or in libraries developing procedures to ruin students' lives with our subpar teaching. No, we are more than that. Educators are human, and we are fallible, as are those who deride educators and reduce the current state of education to binary, false compartments of good and evil. What matters more than this national narrative of contempt for teachers is what we tell ourselves about ourselves, what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about our work and ourselves in the work. In direct opposition to the national narrative, there are those who fight it with the narrative of educators' simultaneous heroism and victimhood. This counter-narrative argues that teachers are being held down and oppressed by public school systems and education reformers who insist on high-stakes testing and merit pay and extended school days and other ideas that detract from good teaching and sound learning. And while some of that argument is true, we have to be careful not to get too invested in the counter-argument to the national narrative. That argument robs educators of our own agency and our own power. Educators are not victims. We are not innocent. We are not exempt. We are not Teflon. What if, despite our best efforts in our work, what if our experiences, our disappointments, our setbacks, our challenges, what if those things have made us fatigued? What if these things have made us professionally blind? What if we have become doubtful? How might our own ethnocentric views, however we identify racially, our preconceived notions of teaching and learning, our expectations for students' behaviors, how might the sum total of who we are and what we bring to the classroom every day be in the way of the success we so desperately want for our students? We, the educators, are at least partially complicit in the current state of education. When 35% of black boys and 41% of Latino boys in Minnesota don't graduate high school on time, when at least one county in this state has only a 30% graduation rate for Latino students, we can admit that something has gone terribly awry. Educators are not the sole culprit, but we are not completely innocent either. This isn't about blame or bashing, but it is about our personal responsibility and our moral imperative as educators to educate all of our students, regardless of their backgrounds, experiences, and proficiencies, or our own. It's time for us to examine ourselves, to search for the ways we could be preventing the very achievement, success, and wholeness of our students we're striving for and working toward. We must search ourselves beyond our best intentions, because remember, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. While we are well-meaning and our efforts matter, it's time that we redouble, reconsider, and re-up on our efforts as educators. We harm our profession and place ourselves in the way of students' well-being and success when we present ourselves as innocent, harmless, untouchable martyrs, and don't consider the ways in which we may be responsible for student success and the lack thereof. This reflection, this self-examination, this questioning how we could be in our own way is not a one-time thing. And I know that it's uncomfortable, but this is about constantly being uncomfortable. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. We won't talk today about new classroom strategies because we are the strategy. It's time for us to interrogate ourselves and to ask, what if the problem is us? When I say us, I mean us in the collective sense of the word. Even if everyone in this room is completely self-reflective and constantly aware of his or her own biases and is working actively to operate beyond those biases, how many of us take the time to work through those issues with our most challenging colleagues? Who of us pushes beyond our own walled-off classroom domains to inspire and encourage other faculty members who may not be as self-aware and self-reflective as we are? What if we are only as strong as our weakest link? What then do we do to get ourselves out of the way? What if the problem is us? We must constantly examine ourselves and our power, our place, and our position. To that end, today we're going to talk about Mr. Green, Mitt Romney, and Jonathan. And except for Mitt Romney, all names have been changed to protect the anonymity of these folks. I'm not going to protect his name. Mr. Green taught 10th grade geometry, and every day he would begin his classes with a review of the homework. Alphabetically, he would call on students one by one to share their answers to the questions, and if the answers were wrong, or if they could not explain their answers sufficiently for him aloud in front of the class, Mr. Green would make jokes, and he would berate the student and then go to the next student. He rarely praised his students, but every day he proved how much geometry he knew, how much they did not. And this was the approach he took in class, each year, for much of his teaching. One day, a student got frustrated with her lack of geometry understanding and Mr. Green's impatience for confusion. He did his regular bit of fussing and making jokes and